What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. Would you like to try out my highly profitable live betting service for absolutely free? If you'd like a trial for an entire month to see what it's like, all you need to do is send me an email and I'll send you instructions on how to get set up. You can find my email address below. As you can see, we make profits almost every month. We actually make a profit on 75% of UFC Fight Night cards. So if you watch every UFC event live and you want to make some money live betting on the UFC while you watch the fights, give my live betting service a try for absolutely free. Won't cost you anything. Send me an email. My email address is in the link, or it is in the description below. Now though, what we want to be doing is breaking down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC Fight Night Almeida versus Lewis card, taking place in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So you already know home advantage is going to be absolutely huge. So if we look at the fights taking place this weekend, we can see that there is a Brazilian fighter in every single one of the matchups taking place this weekend, which is quite unique. I know they do pack Brazilian cards with Brazilian fighters, but you know, to have a Brazilian fighter in every single matchup on this card is quite notable to me. So we know home advantage is going to be a pretty big deal this weekend. So rather than repeat the reasons why home advantage is going to be a big deal in every single one of these breakdowns, what I'm going to do is talk about home advantage right now, and then you could just watch this and apply what I'm about to say to every single fight on this card. So statistically, we know that Brazilian fighters win around 67% of the time when they fight non-Brazilians in Brazil. And there are some reasons for this, but what that statistic means is that you need to think very carefully before betting against any Brazilian fighters on this card, because you know 2 out of 3 times the Brazilian fighter is going to beat their non-Brazilian opponent. Now, some of the reason for that will be favourable matchmaking. At the end of the day, we know that the UFC is an entertainment business, right? They want to sell tickets and they want to give the fans that paid their hard-earned money to go watch the fighters. You know, they want to give them a good night. They want to entertain them. And the best way that they can do that is by ensuring the Brazilian fighters, the hometown guys, perform well, get wins, and delight the hometown crowd. So some part of that statistic that favours Brazilian fighters in Brazil will be due to favourable matchmaking. Because if you look at the main event, Jailton Almeida versus Derek Lewis, it's obviously a very good stylistic matchup for Almeida for reasons we'll go into. But if you've got matchups like that contributing to the 67% statistic we just mentioned, is no surprise that Brazilians are going to win a lot of the time in Brazil if they're getting, you know, if Brazilian fighters are getting very favourable matchmaking such as this. Having said that, though, there are other reasons. Obviously, depending on where you live in the world, depending on what part of Brazil the event is taking place in, it can be a long flight down to Brazil, can be a radically different time zone to what you're used to. So you've got jet lag, you've got the adjustment in time zone, maybe the adjustment in climate. All that can have an impact on how a fighter performs. On top of that, not every arena, not every stadium where events take place in Brazil are air conditioned. So, you know, the UFC don't hold as many events in Brazil these days as they used to. Before COVID, they would hold an event in Brazil like once every 6 weeks or so. And I remember some of the events in Brazil, while they weren't at high altitude, it was so hot and humid in the arena without air conditioning that the commentators would literally be dripping in sweat. Like, you see sweat patches all over their shirts. So that can have an impact on a fighter's performance as well, because if you're Brazilian and you've grown up in that climate your whole life, you've competed in that climate on the regional circuit, maybe you still live and train in Brazil, well, that climate isn't really going to have much of an effect on your performance. But if you're someone like Nicholas Dalby, grows up in Denmark, or has grown up in Denmark, maybe lives in Denmark, that's obviously a radically different climate to Brazil, and therefore that could have a big negative impact on the performance of someone like Dalby. So the climate of Brazil is also something that can favour Brazilian fighters winning. On top of that, we've all heard the chants, vamos, right? It's a famous MMA chant. We know the Brazilian fans are very passionate. They're like the British fans. You know, football is a massive sport in Brazil. And as a result, the atmosphere for UFC events in Brazil can resemble that of a football match, right? And we hear the atmospheres that we've had over the last 12 months on events in London and most recently in Paris. And the Brazilians often create the same sort of atmosphere. And so that can be very intimidating for visiting fighters, where, you know, you've got 10, 15,000 people chanting "you're going to die" in Portuguese, where, you know, if you're inexperienced, if you're not used to competing in front of arenas like that, or in front of atmospheres like that, if you've only fought in the Apex Center, or maybe you've only fought in pretty tame atmospheres and environments, sterile atmospheres and environments like in Las Vegas, it could be a really big shock to your system where you walk out for your fight and the crowd is so loud with their chanting that you feel it in your chest, right? That vibration, that sound in your chest. That can have a detrimental impact on a fighter's performance who isn't Brazilian. On top of that, on the flip side, having that crowd behind you can energize the Brazilian fighters. I always use the example of a personal trainer, right? Why do people hire personal trainers? Well, I don't think they really hire them for help on diet and nutrition or form and technique, because you can kind of find all that information online, right? There's tons of information for free on YouTube and stuff, so why do you need a personal trainer to tell you what to eat or how to train? You don't really need it. I think people hire personal trainers a lot of the time for motivation, because we've all been in a situation where, you know, maybe we've gone for a run, or maybe we're on a treadmill and we start to get really tired, our lungs start to burn, we start to get out of breath. And if we're just working out by ourselves, if we're just going for a run by ourselves, it's really easy for us to just stop and just not work out anymore. It's a lot harder when you've got a personal trainer stood there pushing you, motivating you. When you get tired, you want to quit, telling you to keep going. You don't want to let them down. And they can give you that extra level, right? That extra bit of energy you need to push through. And hometown fans, especially really passionate ones like Brazilians, they can give Brazilian fighters the same boost. So when these Brazilians are maybe getting tired or hurt, start to doubt themselves mentally, you could see a situation where those Brazilian fans pull them out of it and elevate the Brazilians' performance. And that can have the opposite effect on the visiting fighter, where that can knock their performance when, you know, they may be hurt, tired, and they can hear 10,000 people shout "you're going to die" in Portuguese. It's just not a cool place to be. It's not good. It's not helpful, right? And so the final way in which home advantage can have a big impact is that we know MMA judging is absolutely terrible. It is broken. It is a joke. And while MMA judging fundamentally is extremely bad, we're also very human, and we are influenced by other people, right? There's a lot of groupthink. It's very hard to drown out the noise. You're probably going to have 3 Brazilian judges on Saturday night that are going to be, you know, a part of the Brazilian State Athletic Commission. And even if they don't kind of lean towards Brazilian fighters, with them being Brazilian, with how lively the crowd is going to be on Saturday night, it's going to be very difficult for them to kind of turn their monkey brains off and not be influenced by the hometown fans. Because if you think about it, right, if we take a fight like, what fight is likely to be really competitive? Say a fight like Rodrigo Nascimento versus Almeida, which could be pretty close. You know, we could find ourselves in a position where both guys might have a similar amount of success, land a similar amount of strikes, do a similar amount of damage. But if the crowd go crazy every time Nascimento lands a strike, and it's a giant tumbleweed every time Almeida lands a strike, well, it's going to be very difficult for the judges not to be influenced by that. So that's another area in which hometown advantage can make it very difficult for the non-Brazilians to win. So we covered a good amount of stuff. There's probably some stuff I forgot to mention, but you get the idea. And this will, of course, apply to every fight where it's not distracting. How rude! See, he's not my dog going crazy in the background. That obviously I forgot what I was gonna say because my dog's distracted me. Anyway, let's move on. I think let's move on and break down the first fight. So the first fight that I want to break down on this card is going to be Ismail Bonfim against Vince Pichel. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Bonfim is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of around 1.20, which is going to be minus 500 for an implied probability of 83%. If we take a look at the odds on Pichel, he's around an average of 4.80, which is going to be plus 380 for an implied probability of 21%. So Bonfim is 27 years old, 5'8", with a 71-inch reach. Pichel, 40 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. So obviously some major X factors here. Home advantage is on Bonfim's side. We don't need to go into that. We know the impact that can have on this fight. We could also see a massive age gap. So Bonfim is 13 years younger than Pichel. So statistically, that gives Bonfim around about a 70% chance of winning 7-0. So now we've got two really strong trends on Bonfim's side. We've got the fact that he's a lot younger than Pichel and the fact that he's Brazilian facing a non-Brazilian. If we take a look at the size between these two, both guys roughly the same reach. Pichel a little bit longer and taller, but I don't think size is going to have a massive impact on this fight. What's interesting about this matchup is that Vince Pichel basically built a career of just being a tough fucker and, you know, staying in the fight, dragging guys into deep water, tiring them out, being reasonably good everywhere, and just wearing guys down over 3 rounds. And if you look at Bonfim's last fight against Benoit Saint-Denis, if you're kind of judging Pichel on his entire body of work throughout his career and Bonfim based on that performance against Saint-Denis, you could start to feel like Pichel has got a reasonably good chance of winning this, right? Because in the Saint-Denis fight, we saw Bonfim start very strong and then fade very quickly towards the end of round 1. And Pichel's basically built a career of making people pay that fade, right? The only time that we've seen Pichel struggle is when he's faced guys that haven't really faded. Guys like Gregor Gillespie that fight at an even higher pace than him. But typically speaking, Bonfim's the kind of guy that historically Pichel would do pretty well against. My problem with this fight is that Pichel is at that stage in his career where he's going to be declining rapidly. He's 40 years old now, and every time we see him at that age, he should be getting exponentially worse than the last time that we saw him. And I do think we've started to see signs in Pichel that he's declining. You know, Pichel, like I said, built a career for being a cardio machine and outworking guys. But in a couple of his most recent fights, we have seen him slow down. He slowed down against Mark Madsen. He also slowed down against Jim Miller. And so this is one of those situations where I think we need to be really careful not to cap this fight based on Pichel's entire body of work throughout his entire career and instead focus on what version of Pichel we're likely to get in 2023. Because we haven't seen him fight for over a year. So he could have declined a lot since he last fought against Mark Madsen. He didn't look particularly good against Mark Madsen either. And when you look at Bonfim and what he brings to the table, I don't necessarily feel he is one of those guys like a Terence McKinney that is going to fade like pretty soon into a fight. I feel a big part of the reason why he faded against Benoit Saint-Denis was because of those body kicks that Benoit Saint-Denis was absolutely hammering him with. Like, Saint-Denis landed hard, nasty, powerful, vicious, like hammering body kicks, which really would have taken the wind out of Bonfim's sail. And Bonfim had never really experienced that before or gone up against someone who could do that to him. On top of that, Saint-Denis was a lot bigger, and he also pushed a crazy pace. So while Bonfim definitely faded very early in that fight and did struggle against Saint-Denis, I feel like that was a lot more to do with the things that Saint-Denis did well, as opposed to weaknesses that Bonfim's got in his skill set. Because when you look at some of Bonfim's performances from a little bit earlier in his career against guys like Rangel Dessart, Andre Augusto, Nariman Abasov, he's reasonably good everywhere. Like, he's quite a solid fighter. It's not like he's got bad cardio or anything like that. At times he doesn't pace himself particularly well, but he's reasonably well-rounded. And for me, when I look at Pichel at this stage in his career in 2023, what I see is a guy that is pretty slow and not a particularly effective striker, because he doesn't really have much power in his hands and he's not fast or athletic and explosive, and his grappling's not particularly effective either. So the kind of guys that Pichel has had success against in the past are the kind of guys that he could kind of wear down and outwork over 3 rounds. But I think that's going to be very difficult for him in this fight against Bonfim, because Bonfim is so fast and powerful and explosive when it comes to striking that I don't think Pichel's going to make him, or is going to be able to make him work hard enough on the feet to exert too much energy on the feet, unless Bonfim starts fighting like a crazy person and sprinting. But if Bonfim is smart, he's a lot faster than Pichel. He's a lot more technical than Pichel as well, so there's a much more diverse range of strikes. Should be able to pick him apart and outstrike him pretty easily. And because Pichel's not the best offensive wrestler, I don't see Bonfim having much trouble dealing with Pichel's grappling either, because he's got a decent ground game, good balance, he's athletic, and like I say, Pichel at this stage in his career is quite stiff and slow. So it's a good stylistic matchup for Bonfim. He should win this. His odds reflect that. He's obviously one of the biggest favourites on the card. Personally, I do think these odds are very aggressive. Like, I do give Pichel a better chance of winning than the odds suggest. But for me, if you bet Pichel, you're putting your money in a lot of danger. I don't like the idea of betting on a 40-year-old fighter against a young Brazilian in Brazil. We know Pichel's going to be on a steep decline. And so even though there probably is value on Pichel, you can't pay your mortgage with value. And you're fighting a lot of strong trends if you roll the dice and gamble on Pichel this weekend. I would much prefer to pass on it. Find a stronger position for me to put my money. Pichel ain't it. You'd have to be crazy to bet Bonfim at these odds. But at the same time, I don't like the idea of betting on or betting against those super strong trends we've spoken about. So this one's an easy pass. In terms of the over-under on this fight, we can see that it is kind of in the even money odds range. The underdog odds are positioned on the fight going to a decision, which is interesting to me because I think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision. If you look at Pichel's record, he's extremely tough. His chin's very good even at this stage in his career. He's got absolutely no quit in him. He's an absolute dog. If you look at his record, you can see he's an absolute decisionator. If you look at Bonfim's record, he obviously has some finishes, but you can see that he also quite frequently goes to a decision as well. So personally, I think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision because of how tough both guys are. I don't think it's very likely Pichel finishes Bonfim because Pichel's not really a finisher. You see that in his record. But at the same time, because of how tough Pichel is, I don't think it'll be easy for Bonfim to finish Pichel either, unless Pichel is absolutely shot at this stage in his career with him being 40 years old. And so I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision. I'm not going to be betting it myself because these fights in Brazil can be crazy. Like, the crowd is crazy. You can get you can get that kind of event in Brazil where you just get these crazy wars where the fighters feed off the energy of the crowd and they just play rock'em sock'em robots and you get loads of finishes. So I'm going to be very cautious about betting overs and betting on fights go to a decision on this card. But fight goes to decision is interesting to me, and if you really do want to bet the over-under on this one, I would take the fight to go to a decision over not to go to a decision. In terms of prop bets, I'm not going to be betting this myself, but if you're the type of person that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, Bonfim by decision is what I would go for. The odds aren't great, but that's probably the most likely prop to hit. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down what is one of the most complex fights on the card, and a fight that I don't really have an opinion on. It's Rodolfo Vieira against Almeida Prediction. Every once in a while, a fight comes along where you can get a really strong read on the fight. You can understand the fight on a really deep level and understand the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters, but even after you acquire so much knowledge on the possible ways in which a matchup can play out, it still doesn't help you lean confidently either way, because sometimes we just run into stylistic matchups where it really is impossible to predict how it's going to go, no matter how much research you do, no matter how much work you put in, no matter how much you know about the sport. And this is definitely one of those matchups, because it's a real clash of styles. You've got Rodolfo Vieira, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, that has a tendency to slow down very badly as fights wear on. And in Almeida Prediction, you've got a guy with a pure kickboxing style, bad takedown defense, bad ground game, but an absolute dog and a cardio machine. So two really different contrasting styles. And what's very interesting about this matchup from a stylistic point of view is that both guys possess the skills to exploit the other's weakness. And we'll talk specifically about the reasons why as we delve into this matchup from a stylistic point of view. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that this is one of the only fights on this card in the even money odds range, where if you shop around, you can bet both guys at roughly the same odds of 1.91, which is going to be minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So Vieira is 34 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73-inch reach, and Petrosyan, 32 years old, 6'3" with a 71-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Nothing too major going on there, but they're obviously worlds apart in terms of styles. So what makes Rodolfo Vieira a particularly tough opponent for many guys to face is that he's one of the very few Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts in the UFC with extremely good offensive wrestling. Rodolfo Vieira has got very, very good deep double leg takedown entries, good timing on his takedown entries, and as a result, when he's fresh, it's extremely difficult to stop this guy from taking you down. Now, if this fight stays standing, obviously Petrosyan is going to have a big advantage. He's mean, he's nasty, he's aggressive, he fights at a high pace, and he lands hard, damaging shots. Now, Vieira's striking's not bad, his footwork, his movement's pretty good. Even when he gets tired defensively, he's alright. But obviously, he does slow down a lot as fights wear on, and if the fight stays standing, we know he's going to get lit up. It's not a debate. Petrosyan has a huge advantage on the feet. So where we are trying to predict the outcome of this matchup, we're trying to assess the probability that Vieira is going to be able to take Petrosyan down and either submit him or be able to continue to take him down for 2 out of the 3 rounds and potentially win a decision. Now, Almeida Prediction is one of these guys that has very, very bad takedown defense. It's extremely easy to get this guy to the ground, which is a huge issue because we've already said Vieira has very good offensive wrestling, really good grappling control. My one knock on Rodolfo Vieira is that he isn't a patient grappler. If we compare Vieira to someone like a Demian Maia, for example, so we know that Demian Maia was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner with pretty bad cardio, right? Maia would slow down a lot as fights wear on. But the reason why Maia had so much success, was able to beat so many top guys, was able to win so many decisions, is because Demian Maia had a very efficient ground game, where once he was in a position where he took a guy down and obtained a dominant position, he was very, very good at maintaining that dominant position while burning through minimal energy. So if you were able to get into top position, or if you were able to get to someone's back, Maia would be able to maintain that dominant position, run the clock down, win the round without exerting too much energy. Vieira is very different in that even though he has the skills to do what Damian Maia did, he doesn't at present do that. Instead, Vieira is very aggressive on the ground. He's always trying to advance position or attack with submissions, which burns through a lot of energy and gives his opponents an opportunity to either improve their position or scramble back up to their feet. And so going to the ground with Vieira isn't a death sentence, because he does give you opportunities to escape and get back up. But these two guys are light years apart on the ground. And if Petrosyan gets put on his back with Vieira on top of him, he is going to be in an absolute universe of trouble. In more trouble than we've seen him on the ground against anyone that he's faced in the UFC so far, including Caio Borralho, who we will obviously be talking about shortly. So this is a really interesting matchup because there's no doubt that Vieira can get Petrosyan down and dominate him on the ground. And Petrosyan will find it very difficult to defend himself and stop Vieira from submitting him. But we also know that Petrosyan's very scrambly, very good at working his way back up to his feet if you give him just a little bit of space. He's one of these guys that ain't great on the ground. Give him a little bit of space, he does show a lot of urgency in popping back up. And so early in the fight, Petrosyan's likely to find it very difficult because he's not going to be able to stop Vieira from taking him down. Where things get interesting is if this fight goes into the second half of the matchup, where Vieira starts to slow. And at that stage in the matchup, Vieira may be too tired to get the takedown, too tired to hold Petrosyan down. And we've kind of seen this happen in his fight against Chris Curtis, right? Unfortunately, from a betting point of view, it's an impossible fight to predict. Because both guys have got big weaknesses that the other person could exploit. And like I said at the beginning of the breakdown, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how much time you put into research, how much you know about MMA, how great of an MMA gambler you are. It doesn't matter in a fight like this, because there is no way to be able to weigh up and predict which guy is going to do a better job of exploiting the other's weakness on the night. There's just no way. Because if Vieira takes Petrosyan down in the first 30 seconds, mounts him, 15,000 people chanting Uva Moe, Petrosyan being super weak off his back, it's going to be very difficult for Petrosyan to make it to the end of round one. But on the flip side, if Petrosyan can make Vieira work hard for takedowns early, scramble back up to his feet a couple times, get Vieira really tired, then in the second half of the fight, Vieira could be in a lot of trouble because he might be too tired to get Petrosyan down. But based on past performances, based on what we know about both guys, there's just no way to know which scenario is more likely. So this fight is an absolute minefield for betting. If you like money, you'll avoid a fight like this. You're just gambling. If you want to bet this fight, you may as well go play roulette or craps or something like that, because you are literally gambling. If you ask me for my lean on this one, I would slightly lean towards Vieira, simply because he has home advantage on his side and he's getting a lot better at pacing himself. I feel Vieira's advantages on the ground are far bigger than Petrosyan's advantages on the feet, because Vieira is pretty good defensively when it comes to striking. So he's pretty good at not engaging. Having said that, if he gets tired, if he adrenaline dumps, if he burns himself out hunting for submissions, it's going to be in a lot of trouble. So my slight lean is Vieira, but it's still a very, very risky bet because his cardio isn't great. In fact, it's very bad at times. But he is getting better at pacing himself. But you know what? We don't know what the climate is going to be like in the arena on Saturday night. If it's hot, if it's humid, that could also take its toll on Vieira's gas tank, right? So we'll have to wait and see. So take a look at the props, shall we? Let's get into the props. So if we look at the over-under on this one, you can see that the fight not to go to decision's favoured. I would agree with that. I think Petrosyan is going to be at serious risk early of being submitted with how bad he is on the ground. I also think Vieira is at risk of being stopped late on if the fight doesn't go to the ground. If the fight goes deep, because I think he'll be too tired, and we know Petrosyan really puts it on guys on the feet. So I would agree with that. I wouldn't bet it myself. I think the odds are too steep, but I think that's right. In terms of the prop bets on this one, Petrosyan in round 3. What are the odds on that? Do we have it? Petrosyan in round 3, 15.0 plus 1,500. Plus 1,400, sorry. I'm not going to be betting it myself, but if you're the type of person that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching more interesting, that's not a bad one. Because obviously Vieira slows down a lot. Outside of that, Vieira by submission, very steep. Maybe Vieira by decision. Petrosyan might be able to survive on the ground, and Vieira might just control him. Take a leaf out of Damian Maia's book. Maybe Vieira will, we've seen Vieira make improvements to his pacing in terms of how fast he starts and his output on the feet. He's not as aggressive when it comes to striking. Maybe he'll start slower, spread his grappling out across the 3 rounds, increasing the probability of the fight going to a decision. So that's not a bad prop. I don't like props. I won't be betting this myself. But if you want to, bet a little bit on this fight, make watching more interesting, Vieira by decision, Petrosyan in round 3. They're not bad props. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. And I'm going to have a quick drink. As my camera goes out of focus. There we go. Because this next fight's a complicated one. If you like this video as well, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. It helps the channel grow so much. Like, you guys wouldn't appreciate. You guys might not appreciate how big of a boost these videos get on YouTube. The more likes you get, it's wild. So I'd really appreciate you doing that for me. Now let's get into one of the most interesting fights on the card, which is Abus Magomedov versus Caio Borralho. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Borralho is the favourite. It's quite a big odds spread on this. We'll say average odds were about 1.35, which is minus 286 for an implied probability of 74%. We take a look at the odds on Abus Magomedov. He's around an average of 3.40, which is going to be plus 240 for an implied probability of 29%. So Magomedov is 33 years old, 6'2", with a 78-inch reach. Caio Borralho, 30 years old, 6'1", 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, nothing too major there. Borralho's obviously got home advantage on his side. I will say something now about this fight. I think there's a chance that Magomedov absolutely dominates Caio Borralho this weekend. I have a feeling that Magomedov will make this fight look very, very easy. I can't bet on it because there are big gaps in footage that leave a lot of unanswered questions on Magomedov. But using my experience and working with most likely outcomes, I have a feeling that Magomedov is an absolute nightmare stylistic matchup for Borralho. Unfortunately, I don't have the footage to back it up, therefore I can't bet on it. Because if we look at Magomedov's record, we can see that over the last 5 years, the vast majority of his fights have ended very quickly. Got to go all the way back to 2018 to see the last time that he went to a decision. Obviously, Magomedov could have improved a lot since then. These quick finishes don't tell us a whole lot about Magomedov, but what they do give us is some insight into Magomedov's strengths and weaknesses. I can't be totally sure, but based on the footage of Magomedov that we do have from the last 5 years, I have a feeling that he is a pretty strong MMA grappler. He's got a surname, Magomedov, which, even though he's from Germany, usually means the guy knows a thing or two about MMA grappling. And even though we haven't seen tons of grappling from Magomedov over the last 5 years, the flashes of his MMA grappling that we have seen have looked really, really good. And if Magomedov is a strong MMA grappler, I think he gives Caio Borralho absolute hell. Because the kryptonite for a guy like Caio Borralho will be a strong MMA grappler that can shut his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu down. And typically speaking, strong MMA grapplers, guys with a base in combat sambo, are very well positioned to do that. And so this is a very, 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 very dangerous fight for Caio Borralho. Now, I know when we look at Magomedov's last fight against Sean Strickland, it doesn't instill much confidence because he looked awful. But for me, the issue with Magomedov's performance against Strickland were not skill-based. It was just poor execution of a really bad strategy. So we know that Sean Strickland has built a career off cardio, pace, and toughness. And what Magomedov tried to do in a 5-round fight was come out, put an insane pace on Sean Strickland, and break him early, which was a huge mistake because Strickland is very difficult to break and he can go 5 rounds hard, no problem. So in that fight we saw Magomedov come out really hard early, Strickland weather the early storm, Magomedov fade, and then Strickland take over. But just like in the breakdown video between Bonfim and Pichel, where we were saying that... Sorry guys, just got a tickle in my throat, 2 seconds. Just like we were saying in the breakdown for Bonfim versus Pichel, we don't want to be too harsh on Bonfim for weaknesses that he showed against Saint-Denis, because Saint-Denis is capable of punishing Bonfim for certain weaknesses in ways that Pichel is not. The same applies to this fight, because Strickland was very well positioned to punish Magomedov for coming into that fight, starting way too fast, being way too aggressive and exerting way too much energy early on. Can Borralho punish Magomedov in the same way that Sean Strickland could? And I don't believe he can, because when you look at Caio Borralho, he's also a guy that slows down a lot as fights wear on. So if Magomedov slows as this fight wears on, it's not as big of a deal because Caio Borralho is going to be slowing down with him. And that makes this a super interesting fight, because when you look at how these two match up stylistically, Caio Borralho's striking is kind of wild, kind of sloppy. It's just explosive, right? A lot of spinning shit, a lot of big explosive attacks. Magomedov moves a lot better. He's a lot better defensively. He's a lot more technical. So I would give the advantage on the feet to Magomedov. What's also interesting about Borralho is because he doesn't have an efficient style of striking, because he's got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and he throws a lot of wild stuff on the feet. As he gets more and more tired, his striking gets worse and worse and he becomes sloppier and sloppier. Now, of course, the same thing applies to Magomedov, because fundamentally he's more technical, it doesn't have as big of an impact. And so, on the feet, I could see Magomedov doing really well here. Now, when it comes to grappling, like I say, we haven't seen a whole lot of Magomedov's ground game in the last 5 years. But from the flashes of it that we have seen, he does look like a pretty solid MMA grappler. And Borralho has a really nasty habit of pulling guard in fights. And the more tired he gets, the more likely he is to pull guard. He's also got a habit of shooting takedowns, and when he realises he's not going to get them, flop to his back and hope that the guy that he's trying to take down will jump into his guard. The problem with that is that Borralho isn't particularly good off his back. Now, there will be guys that will say, how can you say that? He's submitted this dude off his back, he's submitted that dude off his back. But the thing is, pulling guard and trying to fight off your back can work against the lower level of opponent, but it's not going to work against solid MMA grapplers that can just stay heavy and tight from top position and shut your shit down. Borralho looked very, very weak off his back in his fight against his name escapes me. His fight against Muradov. Based on past performances, Magomedov looks a better grappler than Muradov. So if Muradov can cause Borralho problems from top position, good chance Magomedov can too. So this is one of those matchups where it's very difficult to get a strong read on it because we haven't seen very much of Magomedov. There's a big lack of footage, so it's tough to feel confident in him. But if we're dealing with most likely outcomes, you know, Magomedov looks like he's a reasonably good MMA grappler, and if he is, I think he's going to be able to neutralise the threat of Borralho's takedowns, outstrike him, and beat him up from top position relatively comfortably. Unfortunately, there's not enough footage available for me to bet on that, but I do think this is a very, very potentially dangerous fight for Borralho, and a fight that he could struggle very, very bad in. I think quite often, guys like Borralho need to take a bad loss before they can really move forward with their career. So I'll use myself as an example, right? To reach the highest level of anything in life, you've got to be on a continuous journey of self-improvement. You've always got to be looking at things you don't perform well on and where you need to improve and get better. So I'm always analysing my past performance. I'm always analysing my losing bets to figure out how I can get better. And over time I get better and better and better because I learn from mistakes. I learn the areas I need to improve and I work on that. Borralho's got a really impressive record at 14-1. He's undefeated in the UFC. Therefore, he doesn't really appreciate that his style of fighting at the moment is deeply flawed, and he's not going to be able to compete against the best middleweights in the world if he pulls guard and flops to his back as much as he does. Like I say, this shit will work against the lower level of fighter, but as soon as you start to climb the ranks and face a higher level of opponent, the only thing that's going to happen if you flop to your back and pull guard is that you're going to get held down, controlled, be underneath your opponent for the majority of a round, and you're going to lose a lot of decisions. Borralho hasn't really learnt that yet because he hasn't been made to pay for making that mistake. It's worked out for him, right? He's been making the mistake of pulling guard a lot, but he hasn't been losing fights because of it, so he's continued to do it. I feel he needs to lose before he realises he needs to change and implement a different strategy. And I feel Magomedov may be the style which gives Borralho the wake-up call he needs, that, generally speaking, pulling guard is a pretty bad idea in MMA, and for the most part, a losing strategy. And I know there will be guys that will say, how can you say it's a losing strategy when he's 14-1? And I would just respond, let's see what Borralho's record looks like over his next 5 fights. If he continues to pull guard, I guarantee he'll have a lot more losses on his record than 1. Okay. So, God, I've got a tickle in my throat. Sorry, guys. Now, let's get into the over-under. So, the over-under on this fight favours the fight not to go to a decision. I actually lean more towards the fight going to a decision, and I think a lot of wiki capping has gone into the odds on the over-under. Because when you look at their records, Magomedov hasn't been to a decision since 2018. Came out the gate hard, fast, aggressive against both Strickland and Stolfus. And when you look at Borralho's record, he's got a few finishes as well. But for me, this matchup is a classic example of a fight where Magomedov and Borralho have got finishes against the lower level of opponent, and so the odds are favouring the fight to end inside the distance. But stylistically, when you consider the step up in competition both these guys are facing now, and how they match up stylistically, I think it's far more likely that this fight goes to a decision. Because we know Borralho's tough, he's durable, there's no quitting him. Not going to be easy for Magomedov to knock Borralho out. Borralho's not a particularly dangerous striker, so it's not going to be easy for him to knock Magomedov out on the feet either. If Magomedov is as good of an MMA grappler as we think he's going to be, then it's not going to be easy for Borralho to submit Magomedov. And because Borralho is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, it's not going to be easy for Magomedov to submit Borralho either. So when you consider how these two match up stylistically and you look at it, it's not that likely that the fight ends inside the distance. So I probably am going to be betting on the over in this fight. I think that is very likely to win. Now, in terms of the other props, Magomedov by decision is very interesting to me. Like I say, I don't like props. I don't bet props very often, but I will probably bet Magomedov to win by decision at 8.50 plus 750 because that is too much value for me to turn down. I think that is a really, really, really good value bet. And, you know, while it might not be that likely to win, I could easily see a situation where Magomedov outstrikes Borralho on the feet, completely neutralises the threat of Borralho's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with good MMA grappling, and just wins a very comfortable decision where Borralho's not able to get anything going on the feet and he's not able to get anything going off his back. So Borralho by decision is a Magomedov by decision, very, very interesting prop bet. Let me know what you think. Hope you found that useful. Sorry guys, practically choking here. If you like this video, get a lot of value out of it, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already, it helps the channel grow so much. I'd really appreciate it. Now let's break down the next fight between Rodrigo Nascimento and Don'Tale Mayes. So Nascimento is the favourite at average odds of around 1.53, which is going to be minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. And Don'Tale Mayes is the underdog at average odds of around 2.60, which is going to be plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. Now, I haven't made my mind up on this fight yet, but I am very, very tempted to bet Nascimento. So I can't say for sure now whether I'm going to be betting Nascimento. I need to give him more thought. I might research it a second time. I'll wait and see how both guys look at the ceremonial weigh-ins when they face off, and I'll make my decision after the weigh-ins on Friday. But I am very, very tempted to bet Nascimento for all the reasons that I'll describe in this breakdown. I haven't pulled the trigger on him yet, mostly because I don't love the odds, but I do think he's very likely to win this weekend. And if we take a look at our results, I think we've actually made some money betting on Nascimento in the past. I know we've live bet him, but have we pre-fight bet him as well? We have. We've actually bet against him. And we've also bet on him, which is pretty cool. So we're up close to 4 units betting on Nascimento's fights. So I feel I have a pretty good read on Nascimento as a fighter, his strengths and weaknesses. And I do think this is a very good stylistic matchup for Nascimento. So if you're a member of my community, I will obviously let you guys know, you know, via the Discord channel in the pre-fight betting section if I do decide to bet on Nascimento. You can see we're absolutely crushing it on pre-fight bets at the moment. We are murdering on pre-fight bets at the moment. So I'm very, very tempted to bet Nascimento. I will let you know on Discord if I pull the trigger, but I just need to give it a bit more thought because I'm not 100% sure. I don't love the odds. I wish the odds were a little bit better than they are. Let's get into how they match up stylistically. And we'll focus mostly on the reasons why I like Nascimento in this fight. The first being, he's got home advantage on his side. It won't be easy for Dontel Mays to win a decision in Brazil against the Brazilian. This fight's on the main card, which means, by the time the main card starts, but by the time this fight starts, the crowd is going to be really lively, really noisy. It's going to be an intense, intimidating atmosphere for Dontel Mays. So that's the first reason I like Nascimento. And of course, we've got the video, or the area, the breakdown that specifically talks about home advantage, so go check that out for all the reasons why home advantage can have a big impact on a fight like this and make it a lot more likely that Nascimento wins. Outside of that, we can see Nascimento's 30 years old, 6'2" with an 80-inch reach. Dontel Mays, 31 years old, 6'6" with an 81-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same reach. Dontel Mays is a lot taller than Rodrigo Nascimento. However, I do feel that while that does give him some advantages, him being really long and tall also contributes to his takedown defense being very bad. So I wouldn't just go out with a blanket statement like Dontel Mays being taller is an advantage here, because it might make it easier for Nascimento to get takedowns, because obviously with Mays being long and tall, when Nascimento shoots those takedowns, with him having the lower center of gravity, it's easier for him to get in deeper on the legs and hips of a guy like Dontel Mays. So there are trade-offs to different body types. The reason why I like Nascimento in this fight is because I just find it hard seeing a situation in which Mays wins this fight in Brazil. If this fight were in the Apex Center, I would like Nascimento a lot less in this matchup. But when I go through all the ways in which this fight could play out, very, very few realistic scenarios point to ways in which Mays could win. So usually what I will do is talk about how these two match up stylistically, but with this type of breakdown, I think it's better to focus on most likely outcomes, and then you can start to appreciate why I lean heavily towards Nascimento in this fight. If we start off by talking about cardio, so both guys are a little bit difficult to read when it comes to cardio, because for the most part their cardio looks good for heavyweight cardio, but there are examples where both guys have slowed. We saw Nascimento slow quite a bit in his fight against Alan Baudo, and we saw Dontel Mays slow down a lot against Abdelwahab. But outside of that, both guys have got pretty good cardio for heavyweights. What I really like about Nascimento is that he's making big improvements from fight to fight. So every time we see Nascimento, he's a lot better than when we last saw him. The version of Nascimento that fought Alan Baudo is like 10 times better than the version that fought Ilir Latifi. He's way better, and I attribute a big part of this to him training at one of the best gyms in the world, American Top Team. It's a great gym where, iron sharpens iron. Training with the best heavyweights in the world on a daily basis is clearly rubbing off on Nascimento. He's getting better, better, and better. Mays is improving as well, but he is not improving at the same rate that Nascimento is. Now, when we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, neither of these guys are really the kind of heavyweights that have big power. Because they're big dudes, obviously they're going to have the odd win by knockout here and there, but for the most part, these guys are the kind of heavyweights that are more volume strikers. If you look at Dontel Mays' record, you can see that he frequently fights to a decision or goes very deep in fights, and the same goes for Nascimento, with his last two going the distance. So I don't feel it's that likely that either one of these guys will get knocked out. Neither of them are particularly dangerous. I'd give Dontel Mays the slight edge on the feet. He's more technical than Nascimento, But I feel Nascimento is more powerful, more physically imposing, and he'll be able to put Mays on the back foot a lot easier than Mays will find it to put Nascimento on the back foot. So, if we just weigh up where we are so far, cardio pretty even. Nascimento has home advantage. Mays has a slight advantage with technique when it comes to striking. But Nascimento, the more powerful, more physically imposing striker. That's where we are so far. So, you know, it's kind of even, right, with the stuff we've been talking about so far. The reason why I really like Nascimento in this fight, though, is because he has one area where it's completely undeniable that he has a massive advantage over Don'Tale Mayes, and that's grappling. There's no area in this fight where Don'Tale Mayes has a massive advantage over Nascimento, because striking's kind of close. Nascimento's got home advantage. Cardio is about the same. There's no area here where you know, you could point to a scenario where Mayes is absolutely going to dominate. Like, Mayes isn't going to dance around Nascimento and outclass him on the feet. It might happen. It's very unlikely based on past performances. There's no doubt in my mind that Nascimento will absolutely dominate this fight if he's able to get the fight to the ground. And what we know about Nascimento is that he's a decent offensive wrestler with good grappling control and a heavy top game. We also know that Don'Tale Mayes doesn't have particularly good takedown defense. It's not terrible. It's not particularly good either. But the thing about Mayes is that if you take him down and put him on his back, he's one of these guys that just has no idea how to get back up to his feet. Very weak off his back, lies on his back, doing absolutely nothing. And so we're in a situation with this fight where I don't think it's that likely either one of them will get the knockout. And I don't think it's that likely either one of them will dominate the fight on the feet. We know Nascimento has a big advantage when it comes to grappling. So when we sit back and we reflect on how these two match up stylistically, and I think I'm actually talking myself into a bet on Nascimento here, and this often happens, right? Because when you sit down and you research a fight and you watch a lot of footage and you consider how both guys are matched up stylistically, you'll absorb all that knowledge and you'll think about the fight. But it's not until you then go and do a breakdown where you're basically just summarizing everything that you've seen in the research that you start to think out loud. And now that I'm thinking out loud and kind of summarizing my research for you guys, I think I am talking myself into a bet on Nascimento, because when I think about it logically, there's very few ways in which Don'Tale Mayes can win this. It's unlikely he's going to outpace Nascimento. It's unlikely he's going to knock Nascimento out. It's possible he outstrikes Nascimento, but I don't think it's that likely that Mayes will dominate Nascimento on the feet. Therefore, if it's reasonably close and Mayes just outstrikes him, he still might not win in a stand-up fight because Nascimento's got hometown advantage on his side. So the judges might still score the fight for Nascimento in the event that, you know, we get a razor-close striking match. And then we know for a fact Nascimento has a big advantage on the ground, and if he's able to get Mayes down, he's going to be able to dominate him from top position without exerting too much energy. So I think I'm actually talking myself into a bet on Nascimento here. But let me know what you guys think. If you're a member of my community, let me know on Discord. If not, let me know in the comments below what you think. Now that I've summarized everything, there aren't many paths to victory for Don'Tale Mayes here. And of course anything can happen. MMA is a crazy, chaotic sport. But I quite like Nascimento in this fight. Now, let's take a look at the over-under on this one. So, like I was saying, neither of these guys are particularly dangerous. They're more volume strikers. So I do think it's pretty likely this fight goes to a decision. So if you're looking to bet the over-under on this fight, lean more towards the decision at underdog odds than the fight to end inside the distance. Again, you know, the bookies, the betting public, probably capping this fight more likely not to go to a decision because there's two heavyweights. But styles make fights. Neither of these guys have too much power. They're not too dangerous on the feet. I think it's more likely this one will go to a decision. In terms of props, a couple you might want to look at. First, Nascimento by decision. The odds are quite short. Not something I'm going to be betting myself. But I think Nascimento by decision is the most likely outcome. Outside of that, maybe Nascimento to win in round 3. Because what we saw in Dontel Mays' fight against Abdel Wahab was that all the grappling got him very tired. So if Nascimento is able to get Dontel Mays down in the first and second round, get in the top position, wear Mays out, might find ourselves in a position where Mays is too tired to defend himself on the ground late on, and then Nascimento can get a stoppage with ground and pound or something. And the odds on that are actually the odds are 11.0 plus 1,000. Not great. Would have liked a little bit better, but again, not something I'm going to be betting. But if you're the type of person who wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching him more interesting, I think that is a prop for you. So I hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Nicolas Dalby against Gabriel Bonfim. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Bonfim, wherever he is, they've split the odds up. Where are we? Bonfim is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of around 1.16. Which is going to be minus 625 for an implied probability of 86%. We take a look at the odds on Dalby. He is around an average of 5.50, which is going to be plus 450 for an implied probability of 18%. So Dalby is 38 years old, 5'11", with a 74.5-inch reach, and Bonfim 26 years old, 6'1", with a 72-inch reach. So a couple of X factors for us to dig into here. We know Bonfim has got home advantage on his side, and we know the impact that can have on fights. He's 26 years old, and he's fighting a 38-year-old. So Bonfim is 12 years younger than Dalby, which statistically gives him around a 70% chance of winning, 7-0. Which is a pretty big statistical advantage, especially when you bolt it onto the fact that Bonfim's also got home advantage on his side. Bonfim 6'1" with a 72-inch reach compared to Dalby 5'11" with a 74.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Bonfim a bit taller, Dalby with a slightly longer reach. I don't think size is going to have an impact on this fight. So Bonfim is undefeated. There's a lot of hype behind him, and he's one of the biggest favourites on the card. But how many times have we seen Nicolas Dalby written off in the past, and his toughness, his work rate, his durability, his cardio sees him find a way to win against all the odds. Dalby is the kind of guy that you can never write off, that you can never count out, and for that reason, these odds are very wide to me. You'd have to be a crazy person. Excuse me. Guys, it's that time of the year where you get like coughs, flu. It's the autumn, it's the fall. I've been talking for like an hour, so just a little bit. Apologies, guys. Sorry about that. I like a tickle in my throat. It's been getting worse as this video's gone on. Almost there now. Oh my god. Alright, so I do think these odds are very wide. You'd have to be crazy to bet on Bonfim as a big favourite. While I do think he's very likely to win this, these odds are way too aggressive. We know that Dalby is an absolute dog with no quitting him. He's reasonably good everywhere. He's a tough test for Bonfim at the very least. And that in itself is enough to scare me off betting Bonfim in any kind of capacity at these odds. When we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I think the biggest problem that Dalby is going to have in this fight is similar to the problem that Vince Pichel is going to have in his fight against Bonfin's brother. In the sense that, you know, there are issues with these Bonfim brothers for sure. I do think there's a tendency for them to slow down as fights wear on. I do think their pacing's a little bit off. I do think they get overly aggressive at times. But the problem for guys like Dalby and Pichel is that they're not particularly dangerous offensively. They fight at a decent pace, but they're quite slow. They don't have much power in their hands, and they're not particularly quick either. Whereas the Bonfim brothers are fast, explosive, and technical. And you've got to get past that and find ways to score points in order to cause them problems. And guys like Dalby, guys like Pichel have built careers from making guys work very hard early on, dragging them into the second half of fights, and then starting to take over and outwork and out-hustle people. But I don't think the Bonfim brothers are the kind of guys where it's going to be easy to do that, because they're fast, they're technical, they're powerful, and you're going to have to take a lot of damage to get inside and make them work hard enough to slow down in the second half of the fight. So when we look at how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, on the feet, the problem for Dalby is that his boxing isn't particularly good. He's much more of a kicker. If you look at his fighting style on Tapology, it's listed as karate. And we know that his style of fighting is very kicks-based. His boxing's very sloppy. Whereas Bonfim has got fast hands, hits very hard, a lot more technical than Dalby. So it's not going to be easy for Dalby to gain success on the feet against Bonfim early, and it's not going to be easy for Dalby to make Bonfim work hard enough early to the extent that he's going to slow down big time in the second half of the fight where Dalby can then look to take over. It's not impossible, it's just not all that likely. And when you look at how these two match up when it comes to grappling, while we haven't seen a whole lot of Bonfim's grappling, what we do know is that he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And what we know about Dalby is that his offensive wrestling's not the best, and he's very, very weak off his back. Dalby's one of these guys that likes to grind on guys up against the cage, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot to his grappling. So it's not like his grappling is a particularly big part of the victory for him either. So this is one of those matchups similar to Pichel and Ismail Bonfim, where, you know, Gabriel Bonfim is much more likely to win, but these odds do feel very, very wide. There's no way you could bet Bonfim this weekend, but at the same time, if you bet Dalby, you're fighting a lot of strong trends, you're putting your money in a lot of danger, and I prefer to be patient because I think there's way stronger positions for you to put your money than that. In terms of the over-under on this one, again, the over-unders feel a bit off on this card. The bookies, the betting public, are very, very much favouring this fight not to go to a decision, because I think they feel that Bonfim is just going to come out and completely starch Dalby. If you look at Bonfim's record, you can see why. He's got a lot of quick finishes, but Dalby is very tough, very difficult to finish. He's built a career off being a tough fucker. He's not easy to get out of there. If you look at Dalby's record, absolute decisionator. And he's fought some dangerous guys like Muslim Salikov, Wally Alves, Tim Means. These guys are no picnic, yet Dalby's gone the distance with them. And so this is one of those situations where even though Bonfim's very dangerous, I feel this could be a situation where now that Bonfim starts to face a step up in competition, he won't be able to get those quick finishes as easily, and as a result, reasonably good chance this fight goes to a decision or at least deep. So I think the odds on the over-under are way off here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this fight go the distance at all. The over 1.5 rounds, very, very appealing to me. That bet is very, very interesting, and I think those odds are way off. In terms of the prop bets on this one, Bonfim by decision, I think, is a reasonably good prop. Again, I don't like props. I'm not going to be betting it myself. But if you want to bet props to make watching this fight more interesting, Bonfim by decision, 4.3 plus 330. Not bad. I quite like that. Hope you found that useful. Find a little bit of water to get me through this breakdown video. Alright. Alright. Now let's break down the final fight on this card, the main event, which to be fair is the deadest main event I've seen in a long time. Jailton Almeida versus Derek Lewis. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see the Jailton Almeida, big favourite at average odds are around 1.20, which is minus 500 for an implied probability of 83%. If we take a look at the odds on Derek Lewis, he's around an average of 4.80, which is going to be plus 380 for an implied probability of 21%. So Almeida is 32 years old, 6'3" with a 79-inch reach. Derek Lewis, 38 years old, 6'3", 79-inch reach. So both guys the same size, same reach, 6-year age gap between these two, which statistically gives Almeida around about a 65% chance of winning. And on top of that, he's got home advantage on his side. Having said that, this is kind of like the sweet spot of age statistics where Derek Lewis is at that stage in his career where you'd expect him to be declining a lot from fight to fight. Almeida at 32 years old, he's a baby for heavyweight. He should be making big improvements from fight to fight. Now, I could spend a lot of time on this breakdown, go into a lot of depth, talk about a lot of different things, and go into a lot of detail on different aspects of this matchup. But the more I think about it, I don't think it's worth it. I don't want to waste your time because this is one of those fights where it's really dead for betting, in my opinion. And so if I were to kind of go into loads of detail on lots of different aspects of this fight, like how Derek Lewis has got dodgy knees and a dodgy back and Almeida's inexperienced, blah, 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 it would just basically draw out me coming to the same conclusion I can literally say in like 60 seconds, which is Derek Lewis is one of the biggest power punchers in the history of the heavyweight division. He's capable of knocking out any human on earth. For that reason, you can never ever count him out of a cage fight to the death. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he knocks Almeida out with a flying knee in 20 seconds. Having said that, stylistically, it's a terrible stylistic matchup for Derek Lewis, because throughout his career we've seen that he has absolutely no takedown defense at all. He's very, very weak off his back, and Almeida has good offensive wrestling, heavy top game, nasty ground game, and because of that, he's probably going to be able to take Derek Lewis down, dominate him on the ground. Lewis needs to try and get a knockout before that happens, but if he can't, this fight likely looks a whole lot like Jailton Almeida versus Jairzinho Rosenstrike. That's pretty much it. I could go into loads of detail about, how Almeida looks on the feet, how Lewis looks on the feet, Almeida's strengths and weaknesses, Lewis's explosiveness, the power in his right hand, his flying knee, his blitzing attacks, the fact that Lewis's knees are susceptible, his movement's not good. I could talk about all this stuff. Doesn't really matter though, because if Almeida comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, Lewis is screwed, and Lewis's only chance of winning is catching Almeida with a nuclear bomb and knocking him out in that small window of opportunity where the fight is on the feet. But if Almeida is smart, he will come in this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, drag Lewis to the ground, absolutely dominate him. In Lewis's defense, he's more experienced than Almeida. He does a reasonably good job of working his way back up to his feet, Mark Hunt style, where he just rolls to his knees and just stands back up. We've seen Lewis run into a lot of trouble on the ground against guys like Sergey Spivak, Cyril Gane, most famously probably Daniel Cormier, and obviously Jailton Almeida looks like a superhero, next generation mixed martial artist, good MMA grappler, heavy top game, high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, crushing grappling control, bad stylistic matchup for Lewis. Quite clear what the UFC are doing here. They want to entertain the Brazilian fans. They want an up-and-coming Brazilian fighter to get a win in front of his Brazilian fans in Brazil. So they're throwing Lewis to the wolves here, trying to give Almeida a big win over a big name to boost his profile, push him close to the title picture, and try and create a new star in Brazil that they can push and promote. That's what's going on here. Terrible stylistic matchup for Lewis. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. In terms of the over-under, I can't imagine the over-under will be playable. This should be very steep in favour of not going to a decision. Yeah, and even the under 1.5 rounds is 1.35. Like I say, if Almeida gets the fight to the ground, I think he can get a finish very, very quick. Lewis is very weak off his back, very bad at defending himself, so I would not bet on this fight to last very long at all. In terms of the props on this one, yeah, the prop odds dead fight for betting. Retreat, don't bet. Retreat. Although I suppose Almeida could be one for the parlays. That's up to you. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. If you like this video, please hit the like button below. It makes a massive difference. Helps boost this video in YouTube and get loads more people watching it. It just means a lot if you could do that for me. Subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget, if you want to gain access to my live betting tips this weekend and for the whole of November for free, just send me an email, info@mabettingtips.com, email address below. We'll get you set up with a month's free trial. You'll absolutely love it. Give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? Thank you very much for watching. Take care, guys. I'll see you in next week's video. Nice one, guys. Bye.